Hi all, I hope you're doing well. So welcome to the UK House Price Index for Scotland for November 2024. I've covered it off for September, October and now into November. Some really interesting things to discuss today as well and show you really how it's impacting you in your location, whether that be Fife, Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh, but actually Scotland as a whole and how it's actually faring compared to the UK. So let's get into that and have a look at some of the numbers. So the economic statement is the initial part that comes out. And what this basically does is gives us an overlay of really what we're going to discuss as a topic. So it talks about transactional volumes. So that's properties that actually have exchanged hands, keys handed over, money's in the bank. And then we go through to the types, the average house prices, what that compares to UK-wise in your regions, what's the most popular houses and what is the average price that they're selling for, and how does your area compare. So the transaction volumes and new build volumes available to the UK House Price Index, Rightmove put this together for us. This gives us a good indicator to provisional sales for the UK. It gives us a good estimate of what happened in the recent months through the transactions, as I say, and it also gives us an idea of what older properties are doing in regards to sales and prices, and also what new builds are doing and what the historics look like for that as well. And actually how the HM Land Registry register everything and put the summary together in accordance with that details that are available to them. What's really interesting is the average house price in Scotland increased by 4.7% in the 12 months to November 24. So that's an average house price of 195,000. And that's a really strong compatible market. It's a market where it's actually affordable as well for people, isn't it? This was down though from 5% on the revised estimates in the 12 months to October 2024, but was higher than the average UK house price annual inflation of 3.3%. So certainly Scotland faring better across the whole of the UK. On a non-seasonally adjusted basis, average house prices in Scotland decreased by 0.8% between October 24 and November 24, compared with a decrease of 0.5% in the same period 12 months ago. However, on a seasonally adjusted basis, the average house price in Scotland decreased by only 0.1% between October and November. Seasonally adjusted, what that basically means is exactly what it says actually. So you have peaks. So, you may have more people moving in the springtime. You might have more people moving in the summer. You have a run up to Christmas and everybody wanting to be ready for that. And so what they do is they take the average over the whole and then work out what that seasonally adjusted number might look like and how it impacts you. But comparing the provisional UK House Price Index volumes estimated for September, as I say, Scotland 0.3% in Scotland, a decrease of 4.5% in the UK, so a much stronger position. In Scotland, terraced houses had the highest annual percentage change out of all the property types. This increased by 5.7% in 12 months of November. So the average terrace property in Scotland is currently sitting at £166,000. Flats and masonettes had the lowest annual percentage change, but it still increased by 3.6% in the 12 months to November. And that's an average for flats and masonettes of £135,000. In Scotland, 31 of 32 local authority areas showed an increase in average house prices in the 12 months. The highest annual percentage change was in Renfrew, where average house prices increased by 9.4%. Over a 12-month period, they're now averaging £171,000. So that's the economic statement they put with that. But what does that look like in real terms and easy understanding for everyone? Let's just have a quick look at that. So if we look at here, you can see that the average price for property in Scotland is 195,000. The annual price change of a property in Scotland is up by 4.7%, but the monthly price change of a property in Scotland was down by 0.8%. The index shows that from January 25, the prices look as though they have increased by 144.5% across the board in Scotland. So that's a really strong position to be in. What does that look like going forward? That's going to be the interesting thing, isn't it? So what does that look like? Is it going to be impacted by inflation? Will it be impacted by interest rates? It's a really interesting one. So the Bank of England, their next interest rate review is on Thursday, February the 6th. It's the first meeting of this year, and it will be interesting to see what the Monetary Policy Committee decide to do. What did they do? I mean, the explanation of that is that the Bank of England Monetary Policy, they meet regularly to decide on interest rates. The decisions are based on various factors, and those are inflation, economic growth, global economic conditions. Obviously, we've seen a big change today with Donald Trump coming back into power, so it'll be interesting to see how that impacts our global positioning. The Bank of England primary goal is to maintain price stability though, and that means keeping inflation at 2%. However, that's not really happened recently. So inflation has actually been increasing. For example, inflation is 2.5% just now. It was 2.6 last month, so it has come down slightly. But actually across the year, it has reached up to 4%. So the lowest average over the term of the 12 months that we've just been in is 2.82%. So currently we're sitting at 2.5. So it's slightly lower than the average. What is inflation? Basically, inflation is the increase in pricing of something over time. So effectively, say a year ago you bought a pint of milk for £1. Today it's £1.05. Then that annual inflation on milk, for instance, is 5%. And it works that way through many items within the business and the economic statements that people look at. What we're looking at as well, some of the interesting changes were that fuel is something that's being tracked at the moment. They're also looking at what are the things that people are buying and what they're no longer buying. So interestingly, as we would have expected through the pandemic times, hand sanitizer was one of the biggest things. That's actually come off of the top 10. And interestingly, being replaced with vinyl records and air fryers. Who would have thought it? And they're the things that really people are putting in their baskets. They're the things that people are buying. Those are the things that are impacting what does that inflation look like. Economic growth is the strength of the economic recovery as well, which may affect the pace of what interest rates do and how they're cut, if at all. And global economic conditions are conditions that may affect pace of interest rates and the cuts. And again, we're not really sure what's going to happen now with regards to some major changes throughout the world, aren't we? So it'll be interesting to see how that comes about. So how is UK inflation measured? It's basically, as I said, it's measured by the prices of hundreds of everyday items, food, fuel, and it's the Office of National Statistics that basically study this and report on these numbers. And then the Bank of England come together with the Monetary Commission and they look at, well, how does that impact it? How are people's pockets going to be impacted by it? And what can they afford to basically to spend? The inflation rate is expected, as I say, to be forecast to remain at over 2% during this month and also going into potentially the next quarter. The average forecast among economics surveyed by the Treasury in December said that inflation probably will actually sit at about 2.5 up until Q4 of 2025. So that'll be an interesting one because actually that's going to determine whether interest rates come down or not. So it'll be good to see what happens there. Now what we're going to do is look at the annual price change for Scotland as a whole across the last period. So let me just get that slide for you. Give me 1 wee second. I'm just having a wee problem getting that slide there. Give me 1 second. No, we're not getting that slide today. Yeah, I'm having some problems with the slides there, so we're not going to get those. So I will just move on and talk about it. You just need to visualise it amongst yourselves. So basically what they're looking at is the annual price change for Scotland over the past 5 years. In Scotland, average prices increased by 4.7% in the 12 months to November, and also for 5% in the 12 months to October. So it's still showing that there is still an increase there in property values and price completions. So that's a good impact to yourselves. Annual price changes by local authority for Scotland. Some have lower numbers of sales transactions in some local authorities, but you'd expect that. So say the Orkney Islands, you're looking at the Shetland Islands, etc. They're always going to be that way because the transactions, there's not as many houses, so it's going to be that way. But most efforts to account for volatility and the change in these prices are influenced by the type of property sold in the general giving period over the whole of the UK. So that gives us a better idea. Geographics with low number of sales transactions should be analysed to context the long-term trends rather than just focusing on monthly movements. And if we look at, again, sorry, I apologise, I'm having issues with my slides today, but if we look at Aberdeenshire, for instance, November 24, they were 199,327 for an average property compared to the previous year, 194,245. So that's up by 2.6%. So it's lower than the Scottish average, but still an increase. If we then go through to, say, the city of Dundee, for instance, the average property there at the end of November was 146,301 compared to November last year, 143,157. So that was an increase of 2.2%. Jump to Edinburgh, the city of Edinburgh, 337,000 is the current average price at the end of November versus 318,037 November 2023. So that's almost an increase of 5%. So big jump there. City of Glasgow, 185,465 as your average. But the previous year it was 173,649. So they've increased by 6.8%. So that's a rather real big jump, and actually way over the average of Scotland as a whole. We then go on to say East Dunbartonshire, 276,551 is the current average house price there versus 272,000, which is still an increase of 1.6%. East Lothian, 309,000 versus 294, so that's a 5% increase. We then go into Fife. Fife is currently sitting, the average property is 178,174 versus the previous year at 172,269. So that's an increase of 3.4%. So again, good prices in Fife. We're certainly seeing that increased growth there as well, which is great. If we then follow on to say Perth and Kinross, the average price there is 250,864 versus 235,000. So they've gone up by 6.5%. So some real strong differences there. The Shetland Islands, 192 versus 181. We spoke about that earlier. You go to West Dunbartonshire, they're sitting at 141,000 versus 136. So that's an increase of 3.8%. So the average in Scotland, 195 at 4.7%. You can see how some are bucking that trend and others are slightly under that, but actually still, as a whole, stronger than the UK average increase, which is great. So the hotspots and property pricing, if we look at some of the hotspots, so you're looking at Fife, which has done well. You've looked at the city of Edinburgh, which is doing well. Glasgow, as I stated, is doing well. And again, these slides will be available on the link. So if you do want to have a further deep dive into them, you can do that. Obviously, I'm struggling to try and show them to you today. I'm having a bit of a technical issue there, but you would be able to do that yourself. But in November 24, the most expensive area to purchase a property was the city of Edinburgh. You would kind of expect that, where the average cost was £334,000. In contrast, the cheapest area to purchase a property was East Ayrshire, where the average cost was £130,000. So again, it just shows you where there are slightly peaks and troughs. But what does that look like in terms of the type of property? What do you have? Do you have a detached, semi-detached? You might want to know that. So if we look at the average price change for property types in Scotland, the detached property in November 24, the average price was sitting at 344,658 versus November last year of 327,274. So the detached property has increased by 5.3%. Semi-detached, actually, interestingly, is the same percentage. In November 2024, the average semi-detached was 207,771 versus 197,267. So again, a real good increase. But as I said earlier on in the economic statement, the terrace property is the surprise one. That actually is a difference of an increase of 5.7%. So it's gone from 165,000 to from 156,000 to 165,000. So quite a big jump on those ones. But again, even flats and masonettes up by 3.6%. Your average flat or masonette is now 135,002 versus 130,000 the previous November. So overall, as I say, average property at 195,000 in Scotland versus 186,000 November 23, an increase of 4.7%. So if you've been lucky enough to fall into those brackets on those property types, that's great. But actually, if you're thinking of downsizing, upsizing, or even your first purchase, at least now you've got an idea of roughly what you're going to be spending in what location. Gives you good insight to that. Sales volumes, again, sales volumes by local authority. Sales volumes are what we talk about when we talk about transactional volumes. And if we look at the sales volumes in local authority areas such as, say, Aberdeen, 330 in September 24 versus 370 in September of 23. So that's come down. Angus, 142 in September of 24 versus 156. If we then go to, say, City of Dundee, they are up by 238 transactions versus 218. So again, we've seen that increase at 1.9% in property values as well. So those seem to be going hand in hand. If we look at the City of Edinburgh, the transactions are up there as well. 931 transactions versus 887 at the same time, September 23. Let's look at Fife, 542 versus 552. So pretty much steady in Fife. If we go to then, say, Midlothian, 165 versus 155 transactions, and then you go into places like Renfrewshire, 310 versus 285 at November of 23, so an increase there as well. And then when we talked about Shetland earlier on about the distortion there of the numbers, you can see that Shetland, they had 18 versus 15. So you're always going to be able to get that little trend there that's going to knock that out slightly. But if we look at West Lothian, they're pretty much the same. 287 transactions in September of 24 versus 286 at September 2023. So pretty much the same as Fife, actually, pretty steady there. Scotland as a whole, 8,360 transactions for up to September 2024 versus September 2023 at 8,495. So slight decrease there, and you can see that in some of those little regional pots that we spoke about. But that's quite an interesting one, actually. It's pretty much steady. The reason that, whilst this is a November update and we're talking September when it comes to transactions, is the land registry are slightly behind on that. So they tend to work in about a 3-month window. So we'll get a better insight to how 2024 has ended when we come into the springtime to get a better view of what that really meant for you. Property statuses, again, this is an interesting one when we look at actually what types of property are selling in regards to a new build versus a resold property. And resold basically is pre-owned. So someone's lived in it before and they've sold it on. When we look at that, transactions involving the creation of new registered properties, such as new builds, are more complex to actually understand because, again, the land registry takes some time for those to come through. But what we are seeing with new builds versus existing resolds, the new build average price in September of 24 was 322,820, which was a monthly change of minus 0.04, but an annual change of 26.6% increase. So basically, by a quarter over the last 12 months, new build properties have increased. And what we're hearing and what we're seeing is definitely a lot of that is coming down to the EPC ratings, and also the energy efficiency of properties are a big factor of it, and how eco-friendly the properties are as well. So that's definitely something to look at, and that's why new build basically have that increased price point. If we look at existing resolds, for instance, the average resold property for September 24 was 189,431. That is versus 2.4% annual change. So again, pretty steady with your existing resolds, but that's a big difference from new builds to resolds, isn't it? You're sitting at 26% annual increase on a new build versus a 2.4% annual increase on a resold property. So again, that may guide you in your decision making if you're thinking about moving just now. Do you move to a new build property? Do you buy a resold? And again, give you a good judge of what that might look like in price for yourself. But it is an interesting one. So buyer status is also something that I find quite intriguing, because again, it's good for you to know if you're thinking of selling what your buyer looks like, and also if you are a first-time buyer, what does that mean for you in regards to what you're expected to potentially pay for a property. So first-time buyers and former owner-occupiers. First-time buyers' average price at November 24 was 156,995. That was on a monthly change, that was down by 0.8%, but actually on an annual change, that was an increase of 5%. So again, first-time buyers, real affordability there, but it's great to see them coming back to the market and definitely getting a good price point for the properties as well. Former owner-occupiers, so again, you're downsizing, you're upsizing. Your average price in November 2024 was 234,515. That was down by 0.7, so similar to the first-time buyers. Annual change, though, however, that's an increase of 4.5%. So again, definitely a good trend there. Positive across the UK as a whole, which was 1.9, and it's great to see that actually in Scotland you're seeing a bigger increase there. Where's their money coming from is the next thing, isn't it? Because again, if you are in a property at the moment, perhaps you're up for sale just now and you've not found your buyer. Is that because potentially maybe you're waiting for a cash buyer and you don't want to chain, and that just fits with your life and your decision making? That's something that you might want to look at. It might be something you want to discuss with your agent as well, because actually what we're seeing now, the average price in November 24 for a cash buyer, what they are willing to buy in cash is 177,916. So if your property is over that price point and you're potentially looking for a cash buyer, that might be something that you need to speak strategically with your agent about. Now, obviously that's an average. There will be still cash buyers out there at your price point, but it's just something that you may want to be flexible about in regards to who your buyer is and if they're ready to basically meet your timeline and give you the number that you're looking for. That is a monthly change of a negative of 0.9, but an annual change of a positive at 4.3%. Those buying with a mortgage, though, interestingly enough, mortgage buyers are 203,293. That's a monthly increase, sorry, an annual change of 5%. Monthly change of minus 0.7, but an annual change of 5%. So we're definitely seeing that people with a mortgage are spending more. So that's something for you to consider as well. You may want a wee mix with whoever your buyer is there, someone with cash and mortgage potentially. But actually for yourself as well, if you're maybe thinking of getting on the ladder, you can see there as a first time buyer, you're 156,000 on average. That's also giving you good mortgage options too. And interest rates, as we say, we'll get a good feel for that end of the first week in February and what that looks like with inflation and all the economic things that I've already spoken about. And again, if you've just joined and you've missed that, you can watch this on replay, or you can message me here directly as well if you'd like to ask any questions. But it is an interesting way that the market is changing. Inflation will make a difference. We've already seen this morning Donald Trump's initial statements. Be interesting to see how that impacts us as the UK and how our government work hand in hand with them, because the global impact does make a big difference in interest rates and what that might look like, and also what our inflation might look like, because what are people going to spend it on? Flights, hotels, they're one of the things that have been really impacted this year in the last 12 months. So it'll be interesting to see how that may expand our travel and how we want to spend our money. But again, as I say, if there's anything that you'd like to ask, I hope that's given you a good insight. You can follow the show again. You can ask me questions directly if you wish, if you don't want to do it on this forum, but certainly feel free to reach out. And it's Perrie at Fife Property TV. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.